A cataclysmic inferno engulfed the city of Rome nearly 2 millennia ago. This conflagration, which threatened to reduce the very cradle of Western civilization to ashes, was but a mere prelude to a far more insidious blaze. For in the smoldering aftermath, a fire of a different nature ignited, one that burned not wood and stone, but flesh and spirit. Under the capricious rule of Emperor Nero, whose name had become synonymous with depravity and excess, a wave of persecution swept through the streets of Rome. Like a tempest of flame, it sought to consume those whose faith dared to challenge the established order. In this crucible of suffering, the spirit of belief was tested, forged in the fires of adversity. As we reflect upon this dark chapter of human history, we're compelled to ponder this question. In the face of overwhelming opposition and the very real threat of annihilation, what does it truly mean to stand unwavering in one's faith? How does one find the strength to cling to faith when the world itself seems bent on its destruction? My name is Jared Luchabor, seminary graduate, digital content creator, and a lover of church history. Join me as we uncover the brutal reality of Nero's reign, the horrifying Great Fire of Rome, and how the early Christians faced accusations and trials with unshakable faith in this episode of the Church History Project. In the twilight years of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a child was born who would come to embody both the grandeur and the decadence of imperial Rome. On the 15th day of December in 37 AD, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus drew his first breath. This babe, destined to be known to history as Nero, entered a world of intrigue and ambition, his fate linked to the machinations of Rome's most powerful family. The blood that flowed through young Lucius's veins was that of the aristocratic elite. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, sister to the infamous Emperor Caligula and niece to his successor Claudius, embodied the cunning and ambition that had propelled her family to the pinnacle of Roman society. Nero's father, Gnaeus, though of noble stock, cast a long shadow of infamy. His name whispered in connection with acts of corruption and cruelty that belied his aristocratic heritage. Fate, ever the capricious mistress, struck early in the boy's life. In the year 40 AD, when Lucius had scarcely seen 3 summers, death claimed his father. This loss, tragic though it may have been, opened new avenues for the relentless ambition of Agrippina. With the acumen of a master strategist, she forged alliances through marriage, weaving a web of influence within the upper echelons of Roman society. The assassination of Caligula in 41 AD ushered in a new era, with Claudius ascending to the imperial throne. Agrippina, ever watchful for opportunity, saw in this shift of power a chance to secure her son's future. Her most audacious move came in 49 AD, when, in a union that blurred the lines between pragmatism and scandal, she wed her own uncle, Emperor Claudius. With this marriage, young Lucius found himself but a step away from the very apex of Roman power. The following year brought a seismic shift in the boy's fortunes. In a decision that would alter the course of Roman history, Claudius formally adopted Lucius, elevating him above the emperor's own flesh and blood, Britannicus. This act of adoption was more than a mere change of household. It was a transformation of identity. The child, once known as Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, emerged as Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus, his new name a reflection of his newfound place within the imperial lineage. Behind this dramatic ascent lay the invisible hand of Agrippina, orchestrating events with ruthless efficiency. Potential rivals found themselves sidelined or eliminated, while the intricate dance of court politics bent increasingly to her will. Through guile, charm, and at times outright intimidation, she cleared the path for her son's rise to power. Thus was set the stage for one of the most controversial reigns in Roman history. The boy who would be Nero, shaped by the ambitions of his mother and the weight of imperial expectation, stood poised to inherit an empire. The coming years would reveal whether this scion of a troubled dynasty would bring glory or ruin to the eternal city of Rome. As the wheels of her ambition turned, Agrippina's influence permeated the very fabric of imperial governance. The malleable Claudius, known for his susceptibility to persuasion, found himself increasingly under her sway. Like a spider at the center of an intricate web, Agrippina positioned herself as the nexus of power within the imperial court, cultivating the loyalty of key officials and the feared Praetorian Guard. Her path to power was not without its victims. Rivals fell before her machinations like wheat before the scythe. The infamous Messalina, Claudius's previous wife, met her downfall through Agrippina's orchestrations, as did other potential claimants to the imperial throne. Each obstacle was methodically removed, clearing the way for Nero's ascension. The year 54 AD saw the culmination of Agrippina's scheming. Under circumstances that raised eyebrows throughout Rome, Emperor Claudius breathed his last, the specter of poison hanging heavy over his demise. As whispers of foul play echoed through the marble halls of power, the young Nero, a mere stripling of 16, ascended to the throne of the world's mightiest empire. The ascension of this callow youth might have heralded an era of tumult and decline, yet history would come to know these early years of Nero's reign as the Quinquennium Neronis, the 5 good years. This period from 54 to 59 AD would stand as a testament to the power of wise counsel and measured governance, a brief golden age before the descent into infamy that would forever tarnish Nero's name. Behind the throne, guiding the hand of the young emperor, stood 2 figures of towering intellect and influence. Seneca, the renowned Stoic philosopher, and Burrus, the steadfast prefect of the Praetorian Guard. It was upon their broad shoulders that the true weight of empire rested, and it was their wisdom that shaped the policies of these days. Seneca, with his piercing gaze and silver tongue, sought to mold Nero into the ideal of the philosopher king. From the lofty heights of Stoic thought, he instilled in his young charge the virtues of rationality, self-control, and justice. Under his tutelage, the imperial court became a crucible of reform, where corruption was purged and efficiency honed to a razor's edge. The courts of law, once mired in the chaos of favoritism and bribery, were reforged into bastions of equity. Provincial governors, long accustomed to lining their pockets with impunity, found themselves under the watchful eye of a newly invigorated central authority. While Seneca tended to the soul of the empire, Burrus stood as a shield and sword. The Praetorian prefect, battle-hardened and loyal to the core, ensured that the legions remained a bulwark against both external threats and internal discord. His firm hand stayed the ambitions of would-be usurpers, while his strategic acumen kept Rome's enemies at bay. Together with Seneca, Burrus presented a united front, a duo of competence that belied the emperor's youth and inexperience. Under their guidance, Rome flourished. The coffers of the state, so often depleted by the excesses of previous rulers, swelled with prudent management. The debasement of currency, that insidious rot that had gnawed at empires past, was held in check. Public works blossomed across the realm, from the bustling heart of Rome to the farthest flung provinces. Aqueducts stretched their stone fingers across valleys, bringing life-giving water to thirsty cities. Roads, those arteries of commerce and conquest, were laid and mended, binding the empire ever closer. For 5 years, this delicate balance held. Nero, still malleable in his youth, bent to the will of his advisors, and Rome reaped the benefits. It was an era of promise, a tantalizing glimpse of what might have been had wisdom continued to prevail over passion, reason over indulgence. Yet even as the empire basked in a season of good governance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The seeds of Nero's later tyranny lay dormant, waiting for the moment when the restraining influences of Seneca and Burrus would wane. The 5 good years would pass into memory, a brief moment of light before the long night of Nero's madness descended upon Rome. Nero's relationship with his mother, Agrippina, was complex and deteriorated over time. Agrippina initially wielded significant influence over Nero, having played a crucial role in his ascent to the throne. As Nero grew more independent, he increasingly resented Agrippina's control and interference in his affairs. Her relentless ambitions and efforts to maintain her power threatened Nero's autonomy and authority as emperor. In response, Nero devised several unsuccessful plots to kill his mother, including a plan to sabotage a boat designed to collapse. Ultimately, he resorted to more direct methods. Nero ordered his mother's murder, framing it as a suicide. In 59 AD, Agrippina was brutally killed at her villa, an act that marked a turning point in Nero's reign and showcased his willingness to commit matricide to secure his position. The murder was widely condemned and seen as a monstrous act, further alienating Nero from the Senate and the Roman populace. It solidified his reputation as a tyrant and foreshadowed even more ruthless actions to come. As Nero's rule progressed, he became increasingly paranoid, leading to the execution of numerous rivals and perceived threats. Initially, Nero's tutors and advisors, Seneca and Burrus, played influential roles in guiding his early reign, but Nero grew suspicious of their loyalty. Burrus was likely poisoned in 62 AD, and Seneca was eventually forced to commit suicide in 65 for alleged complicity in a conspiracy to assassinate Nero. Nero's paranoia led him to test the loyalty of those around him, often interpreting minor dissent as treason. Informers were used to report on possible conspiracies, heightening the atmosphere of fear. And yet, Nero's reputation for instability would only intensify in the wake of the devastating fire of Rome in 64 AD. On the night of July 18, the year 64, the merchants of Rome shuttered their shops near the Circus Maximus, a chariot racing stadium. Little did they know that from their midst would spring a fire of unprecedented ferocity. In the dead of night, the first flames licked at the wooden structures, finding eager fuel in the market stalls and warehouses. The fire, as if possessed by a ravenous demon, devoured everything in its path with insatiable hunger. Narrow streets, once the arteries of Rome's bustling commerce, now served as channels for the fire's relentless advance. The densely packed insulae, towering tenements housing the commoners, became infernos. Residents, roused from slumber by the acrid smoke and encroaching heat, fled in terror. The flames, fanned by capricious winds, leaped from building to building with terrifying speed, outpacing the frantic efforts of bucket brigades and demolition crews. As the sun climbed higher, so too did the pall of smoke that shrouded the eternal city. The fire raged on, consuming entire districts, reducing centuries of history to ash in mere hours. The area of the city's poorest became a hellscape of collapsing structures and desperate screams. Even the grand villas on the Palatine Hill, abodes of the wealthy and powerful, proved no match for the fire's advance. Day after day, the inferno persisted, defying all attempts to quell its fury. The city's resources, once seemingly inexhaustible, dwindled rapidly in the face of this implacable foe. Water supplies ran low, tools broke, and the strength of even the most stalwart defenders began to flag. Yet still, the fire raged on as if determined to reduce the heart of the empire to cinders. For 9 long days and nights, Rome burned. The skyline, once dominated by temples and monuments, became an ever-shifting landscape of flame and smoke. The heat was so intense that stone cracked and metal ran like water. The very air seemed to burn, choking those who dared to stand against the firestorm. As dawn broke after the 9 days, the true extent of the horror became clear. 10 of Rome's 14 districts lay in the fire's destructive wake. 3 of these were utterly obliterated, erased from the face of the earth as if they had never existed. 7 more districts, while not completely consumed, bore the deep scars of the inferno. Streets once filled with the clamor of daily life now echoed only with the crackle of dying embers and the lamentations of the displaced. Only 4 districts, those farthest from the fire's beginning and spared by the violent winds, remained untouched by the catastrophe. These islands of normality stood in stark contrast to the sea of devastation surrounding them, serving as a grim reminder of what had been lost. The Great Fire laid bare the vulnerabilities of Rome's urban landscape. The narrow streets, the timber-framed common dwellings reaching towards the sky, and the lack of adequate water supplies all had conspired to turn the city into a tinderbox. As the smoke cleared and the grim task of rebuilding began, one thing became painfully clear. Rome would need to reinvent itself if it hoped to prevent such a calamity from ever occurring again. The Great Fire wrought devastation of a magnitude hitherto unseen. As the flames raged unchecked through the densely packed streets and alleys, they claimed a grim toll on human life, the full extent of which may never be known with certainty. The flames devoured thousands upon thousands of edifices, from the humble dwellings of the plebeians to the bustling shops that once pulsed with commerce, and even the grand structures that stood as testament to Rome's glory. The greatest losses were those buildings which held deep significance in the hearts and minds of the populace. The Temple of Jupiter was reduced to naught but smoldering rubble. The sacred house of the Vestals, home to the virgins who tended the eternal flame of Rome, fell victim to the very element they had so dutifully guarded. Even the opulent Domus Transitoria, part of Emperor Nero's sprawling palatial complex, was not spared the fire's wrath. A loss that would be felt for generations was the destruction of irreplaceable cultural and artistic treasures. Statues that had stood for centuries, bearing silent witness to the rise of Rome's power, were scorched beyond recognition. Precious manuscripts and records, repositories of knowledge and history, were reduced to ash, their contents lost to the ages. The fire had not merely consumed wood and stone, but had devoured the very essence of Roman heritage, leaving a void that no subsequent reconstruction could ever truly fill. The economic toll exacted by this calamity defied comprehension. Countless citizens, from the lowliest freedmen to wealthy merchants, found themselves bereft of both shelter and livelihood in the fire's aftermath. The specter of destitution loomed large over the city, as smoke still rose from the ruins of what had once been thriving businesses and workshops. This sudden impoverishment of so many sparked a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented scale. Upon hearing news of the fire, Nero, who had been residing in his villa at Antium, hastened back to the capital. The young emperor, known for his theatrical nature and love of spectacle, now faced a real-life drama that demanded decisive action. As he approached the city, the sky glowed an ominous red, and thick plumes of smoke obscured the stars. Nero's initial response to the conflagration was one of surprising vigor and personal involvement. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, whose account provides our most detailed look at these events, the emperor did not shrink from the danger, but thrust himself into the heart of the crisis. Nero was seen moving through the burning streets, his face blackened with soot, issuing orders to his guards and the common people alike. The emperor organized firefighting crews, directing them to the most critical areas where the flames threatened to consume important buildings and monuments. He commandeered supplies and equipment, ensuring that water was brought from the Tiber River to combat the blaze. Nero even opened his own gardens to provide shelter for those who had lost their homes to the inferno. Some accounts paint a different picture, suggesting that Nero observed the fire from a safe distance. These reports claim he was dressed in his stage costume, playing the lyre and reciting verses about the fall of Troy as Rome burned. However, many historians now view this dramatic scene as a later embellishment, possibly invented by Nero's enemies to cast him in a negative light. What seems more certain is that Nero took measures to provide relief for the citizens affected by the disaster. Countless Romans found themselves bereft of hearth and home, their worldly possessions gone. Nero, recognizing the gravity of the situation, threw open the doors of public edifices to shelter the masses. The sprawling Campus Martius, once a field for military exercises and civic gatherings, now teemed with displaced citizens seeking refuge. Grand monuments, including the magnificent Pantheon, became makeshift sanctuaries for those who had lost everything. Not content with these measures alone, Nero commanded the swift construction of temporary dwellings. These hastily erected structures, though humble, provided much-needed shelter from the elements and a semblance of privacy for families struggling to rebuild their lives. The specter of famine loomed large over the devastated city. With granaries destroyed and local food supplies disrupted, hunger threatened to compound the misery of the populace. Nero, demonstrating foresight, dispatched messengers to neighboring regions, imploring them to send provisions with all haste. Barges laden with grain from Sicily and Egypt soon made their way up the Tiber. As these vital supplies arrived, Nero decreed that they be sold at prices well below the market rate, ensuring that even the poorest citizens could afford sustenance. In many cases, food was distributed without charge to those in dire need. This act of imperial generosity, while straining the treasury, went far in alleviating the immediate suffering of the Roman people. In the wake of the Great Fire, Emperor Nero unveiled an audacious and far-reaching plan to rebuild the devastated city. His vision for a new Rome was not merely restorative, but transformative, aiming to create a metropolis that would surpass its former glory and stand as a testament to his reign. Nero's reconstruction strategy was multifaceted. He mandated the use of fire-resistant materials such as brick and stone in new constructions, a measure designed to mitigate the risk of future fires. The emperor also reimagined the city's layout, calling for broader avenues and more expansive public spaces. These changes were intended to enhance the city's functionality and grandeur, while simultaneously improving its defensibility against potential disasters. At the heart of Nero's rebuilding efforts lay the Domus Aurea, or Golden House, a palatial complex of staggering opulence and scale. This architectural marvel was to serve as both the emperor's personal residence and a potent symbol of his power and artistic patronage. The Domus Aurea was a sprawling estate that covered a vast area of central Rome, incorporating lush gardens, artificial lakes, and lavish reception halls adorned with precious materials and intricate frescoes. The palace's most notable features included a colossal statue of Nero himself, standing over 30 meters tall, and a rotating dining room that was said to turn continuously, mimicking the movement of the heavens. The ceilings of many rooms were adorned with ivory panels that could be manipulated to shower guests with flower petals or perfume, adding to the sensory spectacle of the space. Nero's ambitious rebuilding plans were not without controversy, however. Many Romans viewed these projects as excessively extravagant and self-indulgent, especially in light of the recent devastation. The vast resources poured into the Golden House stood in stark contrast to the struggles of ordinary citizens attempting to rebuild their lives and livelihoods. Moreover, the scale and location of the Domus Aurea fueled insidious rumors that Nero himself had orchestrated the Great Fire in order to clear space for this grandiose palace. In the heat of the moment, Nero needed to shift the blame to someone else. For some time, Rome tolerated Christianity as a mere sect of Judaism. As the years passed, tensions grew between the Christians and other Romans. The Christians' exclusive gatherings and unfamiliar rituals led to rumors and misunderstandings. Some Romans accused them of terrible deeds, though these accusations were often based on fear and ignorance rather than fact. As the people of Rome sought answers and someone to blame for the Great Fire of Rome, Nero saw an opportunity. He pointed the finger at the Christians, accusing them of starting the fire. This decision by Nero marked the beginning of the first official imperial persecution against the Christians in Rome. The streets of Rome grew tense with whispers and furtive glances. No one was safe from accusation. The delators, informers driven by greed or malice, prowled the city like hungry wolves. They sniffed out any hint of Christian faith, their ears pricked for telltale words or suspicious silences. A neighbor's grudge, a rival's envy, these could spell doom in Nero's Rome. Roman officials, their faces set in grim determination, fanned out across the city. They watched, they listened, they waited. Their eyes narrowed at those who shunned the temples or failed to make the proper sacrifices to the gods. The early Christians huddled together, seeking comfort in their shared faith. In the dead of night, Roman soldiers would descend upon secret gatherings. The screams of the faithful shattered the peace. Families were torn apart, and the bonds of community strained to breaking. Then, the executions began. Wooden crosses rose like grim sentinels. On them hung men and women, their bodies broken and bleeding. Some were bound with rough ropes. Others, less fortunate, felt iron nails pierce flesh and bone. The air grew thick with the stench of death and the anguished cries of the dying. Hour after hour, they hung there. The sun beat down mercilessly. Thirst tormented them. Pain racked their bodies. Death came slowly, too slowly. Another form of execution was the damnatio ad bestias, a sentence of death by wild beasts. The condemned Christians, their bodies weak from imprisonment and torture, were dragged into the arena. There, before the roaring crowds, they faced creatures of savage hunger and strength. Lions, their manes matted with the blood of previous victims, paced the sands. Bears, towering and ferocious, awaited their prey. Packs of dogs, bred for aggression and starved to heighten their frenzy, snarled at the scent of human flesh. As the gates opened, the beast set upon the helpless faithful. The air filled with screams of agony and the cheers of the spectators. Some Christians faced their end with prayers on their lips, while others ran in futile attempts to escape. The sand, once golden, turned crimson beneath their broken bodies. As dusk settled over the imperial gardens, an eerie glow began to emanate from within. Those who dared approach were met with a sight that would have no doubt haunted the mind. There, amidst the carefully manicured flora, stood row upon row of human beings, alive, terrified, and ablaze. Christians, seized from their homes, dragged before jeering crowds, and subjected to a fate beyond imagination. Their bodies, stripped and bound, were coated with pitch, oil, and other viscous accelerants. As the last rays of sunlight faded, torches were put to their flesh, and they erupted into living pillars of flame. Amidst this inferno of suffering, Nero and his courtiers reclined in decadent splendor, their revelries illuminated by the dying light of those they had condemned. This spectacle served a dual purpose in Nero's twisted mind. First, it provided a ghastly form of entertainment, a living tableau of suffering that satisfied the basest desires of Rome's jaded elite. Second, and perhaps more chillingly, it stood as a stark warning to any who might dare oppose the emperor's will. The message was clear. Cross Nero, and one might find themselves transformed from a living, breathing person into nothing more than a gruesome ornament in his gardens. As the night wore on and the human torches slowly guttered and died, their charred remains stood as grim sentinels, a testament to the depths of depravity to which humanity can sink. Amidst this storm of imperial wrath stood the fisherman-turned-apostle Peter. Origen of Alexandria, theologian of the 3rd century, wrote that Peter, who was to be crucified, in an act of humility beseeched his executioners. "I am not worthy," he is said to have declared, "to die in the same manner as my Lord." And so it was that Peter, who had once walked upon the waters with Christ, who had denied him thrice and wept bitterly, and who had fed his sheep with unwavering devotion, breathed his last upon a cross that the Roman executioners turned upside down instead. There also came to pass the execution of the Apostle Paul. Paul met his fate not upon the crude wood of the cross, but beneath the swift and gleaming blade of the executioner's sword. For Paul was no common subject of the vast Roman Imperium, but a citizen of Rome itself, born into that privileged status in the city of Tarsus. This citizenship, a jewel beyond price in the ancient world, afforded him rights and dignities, even in the hour of his death. Thus it came to pass that Paul, though condemned for his adherence to the Christian faith, was granted the mercy of decapitation. In the eyes of Rome, this was a death befitting a citizen, swift, relatively painless, and unburdened by the shame and prolonged agony of the cross. In this final act, the duality of Paul's existence was brought into sharp relief. He was at once a leader of a persecuted faith and a son of Rome, an apostle of Christ and a citizen of Caesar. The blade fell, and with it, the life of Paul the Apostle was over. As the embers of Nero's persecution faded into history, the faith that he sought to extinguish only grew stronger, nourished by the very blood of the martyrs. From this dark chapter in church history, we can draw several lessons. First, we are reminded of the resilience of faith in the face of adversity. The early Christians, despite facing horrific persecutions, clung to their beliefs with resolute devotion. Their steadfastness serves as a powerful testament to the power of Christ's message. Second, we see the futility of earthly power when pitted against the eternal truth. Nero, with all the might of the Roman Empire at his disposal, could not stamp out the early Christian faith. Instead, his actions only served to spread the gospel further as the Christian faith continued to spread to the far corners of the empire. Third, we are challenged to examine our own faith and ask ourselves, would we stand firm in the face of such trials? The martyrs of Nero's persecution call us to a deeper, more resolute faith, one that values eternal truth over temporal comfort. Finally, we are reminded of the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you." The persecution under Nero was not an isolated incident, but part of the ongoing struggle between the kingdom of God and the powers of this world. As we reflect on these events, let us turn our hearts to Christ, the author and perfecter of our faith. Let us remember that he too faced persecution and death, yet through his sacrifice he conquered death itself. In him, we find the strength to face our own trials, whatever they may be. May we, like those early Christians, hold fast to our faith, even in the darkest of times. May we be inspired by their courage to live out our beliefs boldly, sharing the gospel of Christ with a world that desperately needs it. May we always remember that no matter what persecutions or hardships we may face, we serve a God who has overcome the world. In Christ, we find not just the example of how to face persecution, but the very strength to endure it. He is our rock, our fortress, and our deliverer. As we go forth from this reflection on history, may we do so with renewed commitment to spreading the gospel from our neighborhoods to the nations, knowing that in Christ, we too can be more than conquerors. As we conclude our examination of Nero's persecution of Christians, we look ahead to another pivotal event in early church history, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. This cataclysmic event, which saw the fall of the Second Temple, would have great implications for both Judaism and the early Christian faith, reshaping the religious landscape of the ancient world. If you have any questions or comments about today's episode, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out through social media platforms or through email, which you can find in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, consider leaving a review. I'm Jared Luchabor. This has been an episode of the Church History Project.